In 2026, at 77, Kathy Bates is still standing in front of the camera. She is back on television in Matlock. Thinner than many fans remember. Older, visibly changed, but still sharp, still funny, still unmistakably Kathy Bates. To millions, she will always be Annie Wilkes from Misery, the woman who terrified Hollywood so completely that she won an Oscar at 42. She became unforgettable in Fried Green Tomatoes, Dolores Claiborne, Titanic, and American Horror Story. But behind that iconic career, there was a truth the cameras rarely showed. There was a young actress who was told she was too heavy, too plain, too maternal. Not the kind of woman Hollywood wanted to kiss. There was a stage role she poured her soul into creating, only to watch the movie version handed to Michelle Pfeiffer. And then there was the ultimate betrayal, not by Hollywood, but by her own body. Ovarian cancer in 2003, breast cancer in 2012, a double mastectomy, 19 lymph nodes removed, and a lasting battle with lymphedema that turned simple survival into a daily discipline. Yet, decades later, even after losing 100 pounds, strangers were still debating her body on the internet like it belonged to them. How did a woman Hollywood constantly underestimated become one of the most respected actresses of her generation? While the world was busy judging her appearance, what kind of private war was that body actually carrying? And why, at 77, does Kathy Bates' story reveal what true strength actually looks like? Before we answer those questions, we need to go back to the beginning, before the Oscar, before the illness, before Hollywood understood exactly who they had standing in front of them. Kathy Bates was not born into a fairy tale. She was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1948, long before Hollywood knew her name, long before the Oscar, long before the roles that would make people afraid of her, love her, trust her, and finally understand her. Her full name was Kathleen Doyle Bates. She was the youngest of 3 daughters. Her father was a mechanical engineer. Her mother kept the home, held the family together, and carried the expectations of a generation that knew exactly what it believed a woman should become. That matters. Because before Hollywood ever looked at Kathy Bates and decided what kind of woman she was allowed to be, the world around her had already begun teaching her the same lesson in softer language. Be pleasing. Be graceful. Be presentable. Be useful. Be the kind of girl people can understand. Kathy was not easy to place. She was not the delicate Southern Belle type people could immediately package. She was not the pretty little thing arranged neatly in the room. She was watchful, sensitive, too alive inside. The kind of girl who noticed more than she said. The kind of girl who could feel the temperature change in a room before anyone explained why. That kind of child often gets misunderstood. People see quiet and call it shyness. They see intensity and call it difficulty. They see a girl who does not fit the expected shape and assume something must be wrong with the girl, not with the shape. But what the world did not know yet was that Kathy Bates was collecting things. Voices, silences, sharp looks, small humiliations. The way people behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. The way a woman swallowed disappointment. The way a man spoke when he believed he owned the room. The way families asked girls to become smaller without ever saying the word small. One day, all of that would become part of her instrument. But at the time, it was just life. A life in which she learned early that women were often measured before they were understood. Her mother, like many women of that era, came from a world where security and social respectability mattered. Marriage was not only romance. It was structure. It was status. It was a thing women were expected to move toward, almost as naturally as breathing. Kathy would later describe a kind of expectation that hung over young women in those years. The idea that college could lead not only to a degree, but to a husband. The old phrase was an MRS degree, half joke, half instruction. But Kathy Bates did not want a life built only around being chosen. She wanted to become someone. Not someone's wife. Not someone's idea of a proper woman. Someone with a voice. Someone with a life of her own. And that desire set her apart before she even fully understood it. At Southern Methodist University, she studied theater. That was not a safe choice in the eyes of people who believed a woman should choose a predictable future. Acting did not promise stability. It did not promise approval. It did not promise money. It promised rejection, waiting, humiliation, and maybe, if the world was kind, one impossible chance. But Kathy Bates was drawn to it anyway. Maybe because acting gave her something ordinary life did not. Permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to be strange. Permission to be funny, wounded, frightening, tender, ugly, magnificent, and human all at once. On stage, she did not have to reduce herself to the version of womanhood other people found acceptable. She could become larger, darker, more difficult, more honest. That would later become her gift. But at the beginning, it made her dangerous to the wrong rooms. Because Hollywood is always like women. It can define quickly the beauty, the girlfriend, the mother, the villain, the funny friend, the woman who cries in the background, the woman who listens while the man becomes interesting. Kathy Bates did not fit neatly into those boxes. That was not a weakness. It was the source of her greatness. But it would take Hollywood decades to understand that. And those decades were not gentle. When she left for New York in the early 1970s, she did what countless young actors have done before her. She arrived with talent, hunger, and no guarantee that either one would be enough. New York did not greet her like destiny. It greeted her like it greets most dreamers. Coldly, indifferently. The city did not care that she had something burning inside her. It did not care that she could act. It did not care that she had left behind the safety of a more conventional life. It did not care about her sensitivity, her intelligence, her ambition, or the private certainty that she was meant for something more. New York had seen thousands of young actors. It knew how to ignore them. So Kathy worked. She waited tables. She sang in a restaurant in Lower Manhattan, trading her voice for tips, performing not under a spotlight, but under practical light of survival. Plates moving, glasses clinking, people talking over her, doors opening and closing, the smell of food, the exhaustion in her feet, the strange humiliation of offering beauty to a room that may or may not even be listening. That is not the poverty of sleeping in a broken car, but it is a kind of artistic poverty. The poverty of giving everything you have to a room that keeps eating, talking, paying, leaving. The poverty of being talented and invisible. The poverty of auditioning during the day and carrying plates at night. The poverty of knowing you have a gift and watching the world behave as if it does not matter. For Kathy Bates, the early years were not one dramatic rejection. They were hundreds of small ones. Audition rooms, waiting rooms, casting offices, polite smiles, callbacks that never came, compliments that did not become jobs, people who saw her talent but did not know what to do with her body. That is the part that kept coming back. Her body. Before cancer changed it, before surgery marked it, before lymphedema demanded daily management, before the internet discussed her weight loss like it owned the fact of her life, Hollywood had already made her body a subject. Too heavy, too plain, too maternal, too ordinary, too difficult to sell as romance, too much of one thing, not enough of another. Think about what that does to a young actress. You are not being told you cannot act. That would at least be a clean insult. You are being told something worse. You can act, but the package is wrong. You have power, but not the kind we know how to market. You have truth, but not the kind we want in the center of the frame. You may be useful, but not desired. You may be interesting, but not chosen. And for a woman trying to build a career in an industry built on faces, bodies, fantasy, and desire, that kind of judgment does not stay outside the skin. It gets in. It follows you home. It sits with you after auditions. It stands beside you in dressing rooms. It whispers while you read the next script and realize, again, that the role at the center was written for someone else. The girlfriend was someone else. The romantic lead was someone else. The fantasy was someone else. Kathy Bates was off at the edges of stories. The friend, the odd woman, the character part, the woman who made the lead more interesting, the woman with the line, not the life. And yet she stayed. That is the first great act of courage in her story. Not the Oscar, not the surgeries, not even the later advocacy. The first courage was that she stayed in New York when the city gave her no reason to believe it would ever love her back. Stay with us, because this is where Kathy Bates' real story begins. Not with fame, not with illness, but with the long years when Hollywood kept looking at her and failing to see what was right in front of it. She built herself in small rooms. That is important. Before the world saw her on a giant screen, before misery made her unforgettable, before millions of people knew the name Annie Wilkes, Kathy Bates became a great actress in places that did not look like destiny from the outside. Theater does not always give actors glamour. It gives them work. It gives them language. It gives them repetition. It gives them audiences close enough to hear breath. It gives them no hiding place. On stage, you cannot wait for the camera to save you. You cannot depend on editing. You cannot whisper a weak truth and hope music will carry it. You have to stand there with your whole body and make the room believe you. Kathy Bates could do that. She could hold pain in her face without begging for pity. She could be funny without softening the hurt underneath. She could be frightening without becoming cartoonish. She could make ordinary women feel enormous. That would become one of her signatures. She did not need a crown, a gown, or perfect lighting. She could take a woman the world had overlooked and make her feel like the center of the universe. But the theater world and Hollywood do not always speak the same language. Theater could recognize her. Hollywood hesitated. Theater could see the force in her. Hollywood kept asking whether she fit the image. And that difference would create one of the deepest wounds of her career. Before the Oscar, before misery, before the industry finally had no choice but to pay attention, Kathy Bates had already given major performances on stage that should have changed her life. In 1983, she originated the role of Jessie Cates in Marcia Norman's Night, Mother on Broadway. It was not an easy role. It was not decorative. It was not designed to make an actress appear charming or desirable. It was raw, intimate, devastating. A woman in a room with her mother, speaking about despair with a calmness that makes the terror even harder to bear. Kathy Bates gave that role everything. And people noticed. Theater people noticed. Critics noticed. Audiences noticed. She won a Theater World Award. She was respected in the world that had actually seen the work up close. But when Hollywood adapted the play for film, the role went to Sissy Spacek. Now, Sissy Spacek is a brilliant actress. That is not the point. The point is what it feels like to build something with your own body and then watch the film industry decide that another body should carry it to the wider world. That was a pattern. Kathy Bates could create the truth in the room. But Hollywood still wanted someone else for the movie poster. And the same wound appeared again with Frankie and Johnny in the Claire de Lune. On stage, Kathy Bates helped give life to Frankie, a lonely, bruised, funny, guarded woman trying to believe love might still be possible. It was exactly the kind of role she understood from the inside. Not because she was Frankie, but because she understood women who had been underestimated, women who were not packaged as fantasy, women who carried disappointment in the body, but still had desire, humor, and pride. She poured herself into that role. Then the movie version came, and the role went to Michelle Pfeiffer. Again, Michelle Pfeiffer is not the enemy in this story. She was a major star, a gifted actress, and one of the faces Hollywood loved. That is exactly why the wound hurt, because the decision said something without needing to say it out loud. The industry could accept Kathy Bates as truth on stage. But when the story became a film, when the woman had to be looked at by millions, when romance had to be sold, Hollywood reached for a different image, a more conventional image, a more bankable image, a woman the industry believed audiences would want to watch being kissed. There is a special kind of pain in that, creating a woman on stage, giving her your voice, your timing, your loneliness, your humor, your body. Then watching Hollywood decide that another woman should wear her face. That kind of rejection is not just professional. It is personal, because acting is personal. The actor's body is not separate from the work. The voice, the face, the size, the age, the way a person stands, the way they breathe, the way they carry shame or confidence, all of it becomes part of the role. So when Hollywood tells an actress, "We love what you made, but not you in it," the message lands deep. It says, "Your talent is useful, but your presence is not acceptable enough." That is the wound Kathy Bates carried long before cancer ever touched her body. The body had already been judged. The body had already been replaced. The body had already been treated as the problem. And still, she stayed. That is what makes the later victory so powerful. Because Kathy Bates did not win by transforming herself into Hollywood's idea of a leading woman. She did not become thinner. She did not become softer. She did not become easier. She did not become the fantasy they had been waiting for. She became impossible to ignore. But before that could happen, she had survived the long middle, the years when she was respected but not famous, admired but not chosen, talented but still treated as if the center of the frame belonged to someone else. That is a lonely place. Not failure, not success. Almost known, almost chosen, almost there. For some people, almost is enough to make them leave. For Kathy Bates, almost became pressure. She kept working. She kept sharpening the instrument. She kept storing everything. Every rejection. Every insult hidden inside a compliment. Every role that went to someone more conventionally beautiful. Every audition where she could feel the room deciding before she finished. Every time someone implied that the problem was not her talent, but her body. All of it went somewhere. It did not disappear. It waited. And in 1990, when misery arrived, all those years of being underestimated were about to find a place to go. But the world did not know that yet. Hollywood still thought it understood Kathy Bates. It had no idea. In 1990, Kathy Bates was 42 years old. That number matters. Because in Hollywood, 42 could be a dangerous age for an actress even today. But in 1990, for a woman who had never been sold as a traditional beauty, who had spent years fighting to be taken seriously, who had been told in one way or another that she was too heavy, too plain, too maternal, too difficult to place, 42 could feel like a door closing. The industry has always been strange that way. A man can grow older and be called seasoned. A woman grows older and is asked to explain why she is still there. Kathy Bates had already spent years proving herself in theater. She had done the work. She had taken the rejection. She had watched roles she created go to other women when Hollywood wanted a smoother image. She had learned what it felt like to be respected in one room and overlooked in another. Then came Misery, a story about obsession, a story about pain, a story about a woman who should have been ridiculous if played badly, but terrifying if played honestly. Annie Wilkes could have become a cartoon. The lonely fan, the unstable woman, the monster in the farmhouse. A lesser actor could have played her as one note, loud, strange, frightening from the first scene to the last. But Kathy Bates understood something deeper. She understood that the scariest people are not always scary every second. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they cook. Sometimes they speak softly. Sometimes they believe they're being kind. That is what made Annie Wilkes unforgettable. Kathy did not play only the danger of the character. She played the loneliness. She played the sweetness curdled into control. She played the wounded child inside the frightening woman. She played the person who had been alone too long with her own stories. And because Kathy Bates had spent so many years watching rooms misunderstand women who did not fit neatly into Hollywood's favorite boxes, she brought something to Annie that another actress might not have found. She made her human, not sympathetic in a simple way. Human, that is much more frightening. When Misery reached audiences, the industry finally saw what had been missing. Not because Kathy Bates had changed herself, not because she had become glamorous, not because she had suddenly fit the mold. She won by shattering the mold. The very qualities Hollywood had treated as obstacles became the source of her power. Her weight in frame, her stillness, her smile, her plainness, if that is what the industry want to call it, her ability to look ordinary and then become terrifying, her refusal to soften what was difficult. That was the great reversal. For years, Hollywood had asked why Kathy Bates did not look more like the women it knew how to sell. With Misery, the question became, why had Hollywood waited so long to use what only Kathy Bates could do? On March 25, 1991, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress. A woman who had spent years being pushed to the edges walked to the center of the room. Think about that moment. The lights, the camera, the applause, the industry that had underestimated her now standing in front of her, the Oscar in her hands. She was 42 years old, not 22. She was not the kind of woman Hollywood had built its fantasies around. She was not the romantic ideal they had imagined in casting rooms. She was not the body they had been trying to sell. And still, she won. Not as someone's girlfriend. Not as decoration. Not as a funny friend. Not as a softened version of herself. She won for a performance that was strange, bold, frightening, funny, lonely, and impossible to look away from. That victory was not only an award. It was an answer to the casting rooms, an answer to the polite rejections, an answer to the roles handed to someone else, an answer to every room that had looked at Kathy Bates and seen a problem instead of a force. The applause that night must have sounded different, not just loud, vindicating. But here's the thing about vindication. It does not erase the years that came before it. It does not go back and give you the roles you lost. It does not repair the private damage of being told again and again that your body is the reason the door does not open. It does not make the industry innocent. It only proves the industry was wrong. And sometimes being proven right after years of pain can feel almost as heavy as being ignored, because now the world sees you. But you remember every year when it refused. Kathy Bates did not become a star in the easy way. She did not rise on the smooth road of beautiful photographs and early leads. She arrived like a storm that had been gathering off-screen for decades. And once she arrived, she stayed. That is another part of her greatness. Some actors win one perfect role and then disappear into the shadow of it. The role becomes so iconic that it swallows them. Annie Wilkes could have done that to Kathy Bates. She could have been remembered only as the woman from Misery, only as a terrifying fan, only as that one unforgettable performance. But Kathy Bates was never one thing. She had waited too long to be reduced again. After Misery, the industry could no longer pretend it did not know her name, but it still did not fully understand her range. Hollywood is often slow to understand talent that does not arrive in a familiar package. So Kathy had to keep proving herself, even after winning the highest acting prize in the world. That may sound unfair. It was. But it also gave her the chance to build one of the most unusual careers of her generation. She moved from terror to warmth, from darkness to humor, from pain to tenderness, from women who frightened you to women who made you feel less alone. In Fried Green Tomatoes, she became Evelyn Couch, a woman who felt invisible inside her own life. Evelyn was not the glamorous heroine. She was not written as the woman everyone turned to when she entered a room. She was lonely, frustrated, unsure of herself, trapped in the quiet disappointment of being overlooked. Kathy understood that kind of invisibility. She did not play Evelyn as a joke. She played her as a woman waking up. That is why audiences loved her. Because Kathy Bates knew how to make an ordinary woman feel heroic without pretending she had stopped being ordinary. That gift is rare. Hollywood often wants transformation to look dramatic. A new dress, a new body, a sudden confidence, a musical cue, a clean before and after. Kathy Bates could show a different kind of transformation, the kind that begins privately, the kind that happens when a woman who has been small in her own life suddenly feels anger turn into energy, the kind that makes an audience sit up and think, I know her. Maybe I am her. Maybe I've been waiting too. That is why her work reached people who did not always see themselves in Hollywood's usual heroines. She made room for women who were tired, women who were angry, women who had been dismissed, women who were not young enough, thin enough, beautiful enough, or polished enough to be treated as central, and yet knew in their bones that they had a life inside them. That is why Kathy Bates mattered. Not only because she could terrify you, because she could recognize you. Do not go anywhere, because the roles that came after Misery did not simply prove that Kathy Bates could act. They proved that Hollywood had been wrong about what kind of women audiences were willing to love. In Dolores Claiborne, she went somewhere even darker. Dolores was not a woman designed to please anyone. She was hard, guarded, working class, angry, exhausted, accused, and carrying the weight of years. The film did not ask Kathy Bates to be charming. It asked her to inhabit a woman shaped by labor, memory, survival, and moral choices that could not be neatly explained. Again, Kathy understood the dignity of women other people found difficult. She understood that a woman can be harsh because life has been harsh to her. She understood that tenderness can hide under roughness. She understood that a woman who has been judged for years may stop trying to sound gentle. And she brought Dolores to life without sanding down the edges. That was the pattern. Kathy Bates did not specialize in women who made audiences comfortable. She specialized in women who made audiences honest. Then came Titanic, a different kind of role, a massive film, a global phenomenon. And there she was as Molly Brown, warm, loud, generous, funny, practical, humane. In a movie full of beauty, class, tragedy, and spectacle, Kathy Bates gave the story a beating heart from the margins. She was not the young romantic lead. She was not the image on the poster. But she was one of the people the audience remembered. That is what great character actors do. They enter a huge world and make it feel lived in. But calling Kathy Bates only a character actress has always felt too small. Because that phrase can sometimes be used as a polite way of saying, not the lead, not the fantasy, not the face we build the story around. Kathy turned that category into something larger. She made character acting feel central. She reminded audiences that the so-called supporting people often carry the truth. In About Schmidt, she brought fearless humor and physical confidence into a role that many actresses might have tried to soften or avoid. She did not apologize for the body. She did not hide from the camera. She let the character exist with freedom that felt almost radical in an industry so obsessed with women controlling how they are seen. That matters in this story. Because long before her later medical battles, long before her weight loss became a headline, Kathy Bates had already been engaged in a quiet war over the right to exist on screen without apology. The right to be looked at without being reduced. The right to be funny, strange, angry, old, heavy, ill, changed, or unpolished, and still be fully human. The right to take up space. For many viewers, especially older women, that is why she feels personal. She did not represent an impossible ideal. She represented endurance. She represented the kind of woman life had touched. And the more she worked, the more obvious it became that the industry had not discovered her late because she had been lacking. The industry had discovered her late because it had been looking in the wrong way. But success has a way of hiding the next wound. From the outside, the years after Misery looked like proof that everything had turned out well. She won the Oscar. She got bigger roles. She became a name. She became respected. She became someone directors could trust. But the body keeps its own calendar. And Kathy Bates' body was about to begin a story that had nothing to do with reviews, box office, awards, or casting rooms. The first major diagnosis came in 2003, ovarian cancer. The phrase is quiet when written down. But anyone who has ever sat across from a doctor and heard the word cancer knows that language changes in that moment. The room does not have to be dramatic. The doctor does not have to shout. There does not have to be thunder outside the window. Sometimes the worst news arrives in a clean room, under fluorescent light, in a voice trying to remain calm. Kathy Bates had stage I ovarian cancer. She underwent surgery. Then came chemotherapy, 9 months of it. 9 months is a long time when your body is being treated, watched, weakened, and asked to endure. The public did not know. She kept it private for years. That choice says something about her. In an industry where private pain can become public currency, Kathy Bates did not immediately hand over her illness to the world. She did not turn the diagnosis into a headline. She did not ask strangers to process it with her in real time. She survived quietly. That kind of silence can be misunderstood. Some people hear silence and assume shame. But privacy is not shame. Sometimes privacy is the last room a person still owns. For Kathy Bates, the body had already been discussed enough. Hollywood had judged it. Casting rooms had measured it. Critics and audiences had looked at it. Her body had been part of the conversation for decades. When cancer came, perhaps she wanted one experience that did not belong to everybody else. One room where she did not have to perform. One battle where the audience did not get a seat. And so the woman millions knew as fearless faced ovarian cancer away from the spotlight. Surgery, chemotherapy, recovery, waiting, scans, the strange calendar of survivorship. A person who has never lived through that may think treatment ends and life simply resumes. But survival is rarely that clean. There's the first shock, then the treatment, then the exhaustion, then the question that remains after the worst part appears to be over. Can I trust my body again? For Kathy Bates, that question would not go away, because 9 years later, another diagnosis arrived: breast cancer. This time, the decision would be radical. A double mastectomy. 19 lymph nodes removed. Those are not abstract facts. They are physical facts. They mean the body she had spent her whole career defending, the body Hollywood had judged, replaced, underestimated, and misunderstood, was now being changed by surgeons in order to save her life. That is the cruel turn in this story. Hollywood has spent years treating Kathy Bates' body as a problem. Then cancer made the body a battlefield. And when a body becomes a battlefield, winning still leaves marks. There's a false idea people sometimes carry about survival, that if you survive, the story is over. That if the cancer is gone, the old life returns. That if the surgery works, the body becomes yours again in the same way. But Kathy Bates would learn that survival can come with permanent consequences. The removal of lymph nodes can damage the lymphatic system. Fluid that should drain properly no longer moves the way it once did. The result could be lymphedema, chronic swelling, heaviness, discomfort, and a constant need for management. For Kathy, lymphedema became part of daily life. Not a dramatic scene. Not a one-time crisis. A daily discipline. Compression garments. Careful monitoring. Swelling. Vigilance. A constant awareness of the body. A reminder that being saved is not the same as being restored. That sentence is central to her story. Being saved is not the same as being restored. She lived, but she did not return untouched. No one does. And that is what makes Kathy Bates' story so powerful for so many viewers. She does not represent the polished version of survival that fits neatly on a poster. She represents the real version. The version with complications. The version with scars. The version with ongoing management. The version that wakes up the next morning and still has to deal with a body that carried you through the war. And if you have ever lived inside a body that changed without asking you, you understand part of this story. If age has changed you, if illness has changed you, if surgery has changed you, if weight has changed you, if grief has changed the way you move through a room, then Kathy Bates' story does not feel distant. It feels personal, because she did not inspire people by pretending life had not touched her. She inspired them because life touched her everywhere, and she still showed up. That is why the later years matter so much. She kept working. She went to television. She went to roles that demanded energy, darkness, humor, and nerve. She joined American Horror Story and reminded audiences again that age had not made her smaller. In those roles, she could be cruel, wounded, funny, grotesque, elegant, terrifying, and heartbreaking. She did not ask to be protected from difficult material. She walked straight into it. That was always Kathy Bates. Not delicate, not decorative, not waiting for permission. And yet, behind the work, the daily management continued. That is the part audiences do not see. They see the performance. They do not see the preparation required when the body is carrying a chronic condition. They see the red carpet. They do not see the compression sleeves. They see the interview. They do not see the private calculation of energy. They see the comeback. They do not see the morning inventory. What hurts today? What is swollen today? What can I do today? What must I avoid today? Survival becomes routine, not glamorous, not cinematic. Routine. And routine courage is often the hardest kind to recognize. It does not have music under it. It does not have applause. It does not have a camera close-up. It is simply the person doing what must be done because there is no other choice. That is what Kathy Bates carried into the later part of her career. A body that had been judged. A body that had been altered. A body that had been saved. A body that still demanded care. And somehow, that body kept bringing her to the set. By the time Kathy Bates reached her later career, survival was no longer a word on a page. It was not a slogan. It was not a ribbon. It was not the clean, inspiring version people like to place inside speeches. It was something she had to manage. Every day. That is the part the public often misses about illness. People love the moment when someone says, "I beat it." They love the clean ending. They love the photograph after treatment, the smile, the return to work, the headline that says survivor. But the body does not always give a clean ending. Sometimes the body says, "Yes, you lived, but now you must learn how to live differently." For Kathy Bates, that difference had a name: lymphedema. It is not a word most people grow up hearing. It does not have the same instant recognition as cancer. It does not carry the same cultural shorthand. People do not always understand it when they hear it. Some cannot pronounce it. Some confuse it with simple swelling. Some assume it is temporary or cosmetic or something a person can fix if they just try harder. But lymphedema is not that simple. After lymph nodes are removed or damaged, the body's drainage system can be disrupted. Fluid can build up in the arms, hands, legs, or other areas. The swelling can become chronic. The heaviness can become part of daily life. The risk of infection can increase. The person living with it may need compression garments, physical therapy, careful skin care, temperature management, and constant vigilance. It is not one dramatic scene. It is 1,000 small negotiations. What to wear, how long to stand, how much to lift, how hot the day is, how tired the body feels, whether the swelling is worse than yesterday, whether a sleeve is needed, whether the pain is manageable, whether the world will notice, whether the world will misunderstand. For Kathy Bates, who had already spent decades having her body judged from the outside, lymphedema created a new and cruelly private battle. This time, the judgment was not coming first from casting directors or movie executives. It was coming from the body itself. The same body that had carried her through rejection. The same body that had terrified audiences in misery. The same body that had made people laugh, cry, and feel seen. The same body that had been changed to save her life. Now that body required daily care just to keep going. And there is something deeply moving about the way Kathy Bates chose to talk about it. She did not make it pretty. She did not pretend it was easy. She did not turn it into a perfect victory story. She spoke about it as a fact. A hard fact. A medical fact. A life fact. That honesty matters because many people live with conditions the world cannot see clearly. They wake up every day inside a body that demands attention before the day can even begin. They do not look sick enough for sympathy. They do not look well enough to feel normal. They live somewhere in between, functional, tired, disciplined, and often misunderstood. Kathy Bates helped give language to that in-between place. She became involved with lymphatic disease awareness. She spoke about lymphedema not because it made her more glamorous, not because it fit the neat Hollywood survivor story, but because she understood that people were living with this condition in silence. She knew there were women who had survived cancer and then felt confused, embarrassed, or frightened when swelling began. She knew there were patients who had never been properly warned. She knew there were people who had no idea the aftermath could last longer than the battle. Everyone applauded them for winning. That is one of the most important parts of her life. She took something private and painful and made it useful, not performative. Useful. She used her fame not to say, "Look how brave I am," but say, "Look at this condition. Learn its name. Do not ignore it." That is a different kind of courage. A quieter one, and it fits Kathy Bates perfectly, because her career was never built on pretending life was clean. It was built on telling the truth about people who were messy, damaged, funny, lonely, angry, and still alive. The same honesty she brought to her characters, she eventually brought to her own body. And maybe that is why her advocacy felt so real. She was not selling an image of perfect recovery. She was describing the cost, the compression garments, the swelling, the therapy, the daily management, the frustration, the fact that survival can save you and still leave you with work to do every morning. Keep watching, because this is where Kathy Bates' story becomes even more personal. Not as a star, not as an Oscar winner, but as a woman learning how to live with a body the world kept misunderstanding. There was also the question of loneliness. Not the dramatic kind of loneliness that movies know how to show. Not a woman crying in a dark room with rain on the window. Real loneliness is usually more ordinary than that. It is practical. It lives in calendars, appointments, car rides, pharmacy counters, waiting rooms, and houses that do not always echo with another person's footsteps. Kathy Bates was married to actor Tony Campisi from 1991 to 1997. Their relationship had begun years earlier, long before the Oscar turned her into a household name. But the marriage ended. She did not build the kind of traditional family life that many people still expect women to build. She did not have children. There is no need to turn that into tragedy in a cheap way. Many women live full, rich, chosen lives without children. Many marriages end without becoming a simple story of failure. Kathy Bates has never needed the public to reduce her life to what it did or did not contain. But it would also be dishonest to ignore what it means to face serious illness without the architecture of a traditional household around you. When a diagnosis comes, ordinary life suddenly becomes complicated. Who drives you home? Who sits in the waiting room? Who hears the doctor's word with you? Who remembers the details you forgot because fear filled your ears? Who checks the wound? Who notices the swelling? Who goes to the pharmacy? Who helps you decide whether a symptom is urgent or just part of the new normal? Who is there when the room is quiet and the public has moved on? Those are not glamorous questions, but they are the questions of real survival. Kathy Bates built a life around work. And what work it was. Theater, film, television, characters that reached millions of people. She filled screens with presence. She gave viewers women who were not easy, not decorative, not simple, and not ashamed of taking up space. But work is not the same as companionship. A set can become a family for a few months. Then the production ends. The lights come down. The costume goes back. The trailer empties. Everyone moves to the next project. And the body goes home with you. That is a part of Kathy Bates' story that should make people pause. Because for all her public strength, for all her blunt humor, for all the toughness people admire in her, she still had to live the private side of survival. She still had to manage the ongoing condition. She still had to wake up in the morning and deal with the body that had been saved but changed. This is not to say her life was empty. It clearly was not. She had friends, colleagues, work, purpose, admiration, and a career many actors would envy. But there is a difference between being admired and being accompanied. A difference between being praised by strangers and having someone sit with you through the boring, frightening maintenance of being alive. That difference matters in a story like this, because many older viewers understand it. They understand that strength often happens when no one is clapping. They understand that the real battle is not always the surgery. Sometimes it is the 10th appointment afterward, the second year afterward, the third year afterward, the daily discipline after everyone else has stopped asking. For Kathy Bates, that discipline became part of her identity, whether she wanted it or not. She did not disappear. She did not turn her pain into a costume. She kept acting. She kept showing up. She kept using the same body that had been criticized, operated on, swollen, questioned, and watched. And that body became something different over time. Not a problem. Not a flaw. Not a failure. A record. a record of everything she had survived. That is why the old Hollywood judgments look so small now. Too heavy, too plain, too maternal. Not the kind of woman audiences want to kiss. Those words sound different after you understand what her body actually carried. That body carried rejection. It carried tables and trays in New York. It carried stage roles of film industry handed to other women. It carried the force of Annie Wilkes. It carried the warmth of Evelyn Couch. It carried Dolores Claiborne's hard-earned fury. It carried Molly Brown's humor and heart. It carried cancer. It carried chemotherapy. It carried a double mastectomy. It carried the loss of lymph nodes. It carried swelling and pain and daily management. It carried loneliness. It carried age. And still, it carried her back to the camera. That is why Kathy Bates' story cannot be reduced to illness. It is about dignity. The dignity of a woman refusing to apologize for the body that got her through. And that dignity became even more visible in the later years. At an age when many actresses are quietly pushed toward the margins, Kathy Bates returned to television in a leading role with Matlock. Not as a soft cameo. Not as a brief appearance designed to remind people she still existed. A real role, a central role, a role that asked her to carry the story. That is important, because Hollywood has a habit of praising older actresses in speeches while giving them very little to do. It loves to call them legends. It loves to stand for them at award shows. It loves to show old clips. But it does not always give them new work worthy of their talent. With Matlock, Kathy Bates was not only being remembered, she was being used. In the best sense, given material, given responsibility, given the center. And at 77, that matters. She appeared thinner than many fans remembered. That became part of the conversation almost immediately, because the public still has not learned how to see women's bodies without turning them into a debate. She had lost around 100 pounds. She later explained that most of it came through years of changes in diet and lifestyle, especially after a diabetes diagnosis, and that medication helped with the final portion. But nuance rarely travels as fast as judgment. People speculated. People guessed. People reduced. Some praised her. Some questioned her. Some turned her body into another before and after story, as if the body of Kathy Bates were a public project rather than a private life. There's a painful symmetry in that. When she was young, Hollywood judged her body because it did not fit the fantasy. When she was older, the internet judged her body because it had changed. Different era. Same habit. The world still wanted to explain her body to itself. But Kathy Bates did not owe the world a simple explanation. Her weight loss was not a magic trick. It was not a confession. It was not a surrender to Hollywood beauty standards. It was part of a long, complicated relationship with health, age, illness, mobility, and survival. A body that has dealt with lymphedema does not belong inside the shallow language of celebrity weight loss. A body that has survived cancer twice cannot be understood through gossip about size. A woman who has spent decades being judged does not become less human because the numbers on a scale changed. And yet, the conversation kept happening. Then came the 2026 Oscars image controversy. At 77, Kathy Bates appeared in the public eye again, and instead of simply letting an older woman exist in her own face, her own shape, her own dress, her own lived-in beauty, the internet began discussing altered-looking images. Some observers said the photos appeared edited, skin smooth, waist narrowed, fabric changed, the ordinary evidence of age and life softened into something less real. The reaction from many fans was telling. They were not asking for Kathy Bates to look untouched. They were angry because they believed she did not need to be touched up. That is a powerful thing. Because for decades, Hollywood had acted as if Kathy Bates needed to be changed before audiences could accept her. But now, many viewers were saying the opposite. Leave her alone. Let her look like herself. Let her be 77. Let her be changed. Let her be human. Let her be Kathy Bates. That reaction says something about the relationship she has built with audiences. They do not love her because she fits an image. They love her because she breaks the image open. They trust her because she does not feel manufactured. They recognize the truth in her face, her voice, her timing, her refusal to sand herself down into something smoother and easier to sell. And that is exactly why the stage of her life feels so meaningful. At 77, Kathy Bates is not pretending to be untouched by time. She is not pretending the body did not change. She is not pretending illness did not leave marks. She is not pretending Hollywood was always kind. She is standing there anyway. That is the victory. Not perfection. Presence. Not glamour. Truth. Not being unmarked. Being unashamed. And that is why Matlock matters beyond ratings or reviews. It gives viewers a chance to see an older woman, a changed woman, a survivor, not as a symbol placed gently in the corner, but as the engine of the story. Think about how rare that still is. A woman in her late 70s carrying a network show. A woman whose body has been publicly discussed for decades, still standing in the center of the frame. A woman who has survived cancer, chronic illness, body judgment, rejection, divorce, and age, still delivering lines of precision, wit, and authority. That is not nostalgia. That is power. And it is the kind of power that does not have to shout. Older viewers understand this kind of power better than anyone. Because by 60, 70, 80 years old, most people know that strength does not always look like a victory pose. Sometimes strength looks like keeping the appointment, wearing the sleeve, taking the medication, going back to work, getting dressed when the body aches, laughing when life has not been gentle, sitting in the chair and doing the job anyway. Kathy Bates makes that visible, not because she talks about it every second, because she is still there, and sometimes still there's a whole sermon. By 2026, the public conversation around Kathy Bates had become a strange mixture of admiration and old habits. People celebrated her. People worried about her. People praised her weight loss. People speculated about it. People admired her return to television. People still commented on how she looked. The language changed, but the attention remained fixed on the same thing: her body. But now, the meaning had changed. At 30, that attention could be used to exclude her. At 42, she made it impossible to exclude her. At 64, disease changed the body in ways no casting director could control. At 77, that body became evidence. Evidence that the industry had been wrong. Evidence that illness had not erased her. Evidence that a woman can be altered and still powerful. Evidence that survival does not have to look clean to be worthy of respect. That is the deeper reason people respond to Kathy Bates now. They are not only admiring a career, they are recognizing a life. They are seeing someone who did not get the easy version. She did not get the easy beauty. She did not get the easy stardom. She did not get the easy body. She did not get the easy recovery. She did not get the easy aging. And yet, she built something better than easy. She built something durable, a career that lasted, a reputation that deepened, a public honesty that helped people, a body of work that made room for women Hollywood often ignored, a life that says you can be changed and still continue. You can be marked and still matter. You can be older and still central. You can survive without pretending survival made you perfect. That is why Kathy Bates' life is not simply a story of illness or rejection. It is a story of a woman whose body was judged, replaced, changed, and questioned for decades, and yet that same body carried her through one of the most respected acting careers of her generation. At 77, she is not a symbol of perfect survival. She is something more honest, proof that a woman can be changed by life, marked by illness, underestimated by an industry, and still stand with dignity. And maybe that is why her story feels so personal. Because most people, if they live long enough, eventually meet a version of themselves they did not expect. A body that changes. A dream that takes too long. A career that does not reward them when it should. A marriage that does not last. A diagnosis that changes a calendar. A mirror that starts telling a different story. A world that keeps judging what it does not understand. Kathy Bates did not avoid those things. She lived through them. Then she made art with them. That is what makes her extraordinary. Not that she was untouched. That she was touched by life over and over and still returned with more truth. For decades, Hollywood tried to decide what Kathy Bates was not. Not thin enough. Not soft enough. Not young enough. Not romantic enough. Not easy enough. Not the woman for the kiss. Not the body for the poster. Not the face for the fantasy. But Kathy Bates kept answering with work. With Annie Wilkes. With Evelyn Couch. With Dolores Claiborne. With Molly Brown. With American Horror Story. With Matlock. With every role that said in one way or another, you were looking at the wrong thing. She was never the problem. The problem was the narrowness of the rooms judging her. And that is why her body image, as one fan beautifully put it, can feel like a badge of honor. Not because pain is beautiful. Not because illness is romantic. Not because rejection is noble. But because she carried it all and kept going. The body they judged became the body that proved them wrong. The body they questioned became the body that survived. The body they tried to define became the body that made history. And the woman inside it never disappeared. What do you remember most about Kathy Bates? Was it misery? The performance that made the world afraid to look away? Was it fried green tomatoes, where she gave quiet women permission to wake up? Was it Dolores Claiborne, where she showed the hard dignity of a woman who had survived too much? Was it Titanic, where she brought warmth and humor into one of the biggest films ever made? Was it American Horror Story, where she proved age had not softened her power? Or is it Matlock, where at 77, she is still standing in the center of the frame? Leave your answer in the comments. And if Kathy Bates' story has ever encouraged you, if you have ever lived inside a body that changed or carried a private battle no one else could see, tell us that too. Because stories like hers are not just celebrity stories. They are reminders. They remind us that strength does not always look like youth. It does not always look like beauty. It does not always look like perfect health. Sometimes strength looks like a woman walking back onto a set after surgery. Sometimes it looks like putting on a compression garment before anyone sees you. Sometimes it looks like making the appointment. Sometimes it looks like refusing to apologize for a face, a body, a voice, or an age that tells the truth. Kathy Bates has spent more than 5 decades telling the truth through other people's lives. Now, at 77, her own life tells one of the strongest truths of all. You can be underestimated and still rise. You can be changed and still be whole. You can be marked by illness and still be magnificent. You can be judged by the world and still belong completely to yourself. If this story moved you, leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it tells us these stories are worth telling. Before you go, tell us what city you are watching from. There is something powerful about knowing that people from different places, different ages, and different lives are sitting with the same story tonight. A story about a woman Hollywood did not know how to place. A woman illness could not erase. A woman time could not make small. A woman who is still here, still sharp, still funny, still unmistakably Kathy Bates, and still showing us what true strength actually looks like